Okay, so finally I have gotten round to doing the foot archers, and the foot archers I would say are one of the more important aspects of your army in Reforged because of how strong they are. They were always pretty strong in vanilla Third Age, honestly, but in Reforged I think they've gotten even stronger, especially the elite ones, because of how effective they are in melee and how much damage they can do at range. So pretty important units here, and also it's worth mentioning that I do mean these are the best units in context of a single unit of archers. Generally speaking, you're never going to be able to mass these guys up to be your full archer line. A lot of them are even intended to be a general bodyguard unit. In the case of, more than half the list, I would say this is true. So these are the best archers in context of single units, as with all the other lists. It's not easy to mass these guys to any extent. That will potentially be for another time, massable units, but here, just single units, the amount of killing a single unit can get done, and how powerful they are, both at range and in melee, because all these units, for the most part, are pretty good in melee, honestly. Good hybrid units. So, we will be starting the list at number 10, of course. So, coming in at number 10, we have the elite variant of Gondor's Ithilien Rangers. They were on the vanilla list as well, but these guys are pretty darn good. They're Gondor's best archers. All the others tend to be either pretty squishy or don't have enough missile damage, but these guys are the exception. They are pretty outstanding archers for what they are. Gondor have been nerfed in the most recent patch, so their archers are a little bit weaker, and this does make sense because Gondor shouldn't have better archers than the likes of Dale. But as for the Ithilien Rangers, they have 17 attack, 23 defense, and 8 charge. They have 103 men in the unit under normal circumstances. They have 13 missile damage and 2 hit points. And as for their other things, they can deploy stakes, they are experts at hiding in woods, and they have good armor and excellent stamina. And what prevents them from getting any higher is they have the joint lowest missile damage of any unit on this list, and also they only have good armor. Against other elite archers, particularly the ones that are on this list, just having good armor can be a bit of a risk, because it means in the skirmish fight you can be outperformed. Also, in melee, their stats are pretty much the weakest of any on this list, but it's still pretty good for an archer unit, particularly a ranger unit. Traditionally these guys tend to be kind of squishy in melee, but these guys are pretty good. And as Gondor, generally speaking, your archers are going to be shielded by your stronger units. Gondor have got very tough melee infantry, so provided you can cover your archers, hopefully these guys won't be committed to melee until much later in the fight when they may be able to swing the fight in your favour. But yes, the Ithilien Rangers at number 10. Now we'll move on to number 9. So at number 9 we have the elite variant of Dale's Bardian Marksmen, and in vanilla the Bardian Marksmen honestly had a claim to being the best all-round arch unit because of how relatively cheap and damaging they were. They really make Dale a very dangerous faction. Dale have evolved somewhat into being a little bit more than just their archers. They are somewhat outperformed in terms of archery by a couple of other factions now, but nonetheless the Bardian Marksmen still have a place here. They have 18 attack, 39 defense, and 9 charge, 103 men in the unit, and 13 missile damage and 2 hit points, just like the Ithilien Rangers. And as for other things, they have excellent armor and good stamina. So really, at range, they're no better or worse than the Ithilien Rangers, but the real difference between them is, of course, the Bardian Marksmen are much tougher. That 39 defense and that excellent armor means they are decent at range. In melee, they are perhaps still a little bit lacking because of their low attack score, but again, similar to the Ithilien Rangers and Gondor as a whole, Dale are very good at defending their archers in general, so you'll only really be committing these guys to melee and later in the fight when, again, they'll probably be able to swing it. And these guys in melee will at least last a lot longer than the Ithilien Rangers because of that super high defense score and their excellent armor. But again, perhaps a little lacking in terms of missile damage and overall utility, but nonetheless, Dale still have one of the better repertoires of archers, shall we say. And yeah, the Bardian Marksmen, while they may not be the monsters that they once were, they're still pretty good, the elite variant. And now we'll move on to number 8. So one of the things that I've mentioned before is Mordor still have archers or archer superiority over their fellow orc factions, and this is the best of them, the Temple Guard, or Black Númenórean Archers, and their stats are 26 attack, 29 defense, and 9 charge. They have only 81 men in the unit under normal circumstances, and they have 13 missile damage and 2 hit points, just like the units previous to this. But they are good versus armor and in the snow, and they have excellent armor and stamina of their own, and that effectiveness against armor is what makes them better than the 2 units that come before, because essentially it means that they have almost crossbow-like properties when dealing with units at range, whilst having that archer usefulness of being able to not lose the power of their shots when they arc it as much. And also, Mordor, I would say, needed good archers. When you look at Gundabad, you could honestly say that Gundabad's infantry corps, at least their elite infantry corps, is better than Mordor's. So in order for Mordor to still remain the kings of the evil factions, as it were, they needed some power elsewhere, and this is a unit which certainly provides that. Also, their melee stats are very, very good, of course. 26 attack and 29 defense, in addition to their excellent armor and stamina, means they're not that much worse than most elite infantry in melee. Almost an elf tier archer, really. The only thing that really lets them down a little bit when compared to some of the better archers on this list is that only 13 missile damage. Most of the higher placing units have gotten at least 2 more points than that in damage, but still very effective, very survivable, and very scary both in melee and at range. But again, you'll only likely have one of these units, but teaming them with the Númenórean Shadow Guard can give Mordor a very deadly ranged presence on the battlefield. But now we shall move on to number 7. So at number 7 we have the very cool looking Haradrim Hasharii Shadows. They have 26 attack, 25 defense, and 9 charge. They have 122 men in the unit under normal circumstances, 13 missile damage and 2 hit points, the last unit to have only 13 missile damage on this list. They can deploy stakes, they can hide anywhere, they are good versus armor and in deserts, they have good armor and excellent stamina. It was a very close run thing between these guys and the Temple Guard, honestly, but I honestly thought that having more men in the unit did make a significant difference. The amount of damage you can get done in a shorter amount of time is significant when it comes to archers. Obviously, it's not the be-all and end-all. The Temple Guard had better armor than these guys, and better defense, but the Hasharii Shadows managed to win because of the amount of damage they can do quickly, and also, there is something else, which I don't know if that's been changed in the recent patch, but it was something that was noted while we were playing before, is these guys have their morale set to 100 at all times, so it means they can't be broken. At least that's what it was like in the last patch, I'm pretty sure. That might have changed, but that's a pretty significant thing, because it means you could park these guys in front of an enemy horde, and they wouldn't break in any circumstance back then. That might have changed, as I've said, but even without that, I'd say that Hasharii Shadows have the slight edge over the Temple Guard, simply because of the amount of utility they have, and the amount of damage they can get done quickly. The good versus armor, of course, is key, because it means they retain their power, and can dish out the damage just as effectively as the Temple Guard. In melee, the Temple Guard are slightly better, but again, the Hasharii Shadows, I think, the ranged benefits outweigh the drawbacks in melee, and they're only slight drawbacks. These guys are still pretty deadly in melee. You don't want to send low tier infantry at them, they'll just get turned away at the door. But now we shall move on to number 6. So at number 6 we have a Silvan Elven unit. Of course they would find their way onto the list, and this is the Sindar Archers, a returning unit from Vanilla. They have 20 attack, 28 defense, and 10 charge, 76 men in the unit under normal circumstances. They do 15 missile damage and have 2 hit points. They're good versus armor, good armor, excellent stamina. The Silvan Elves honestly find themselves in a kind of weird place in terms of the balancing, because their archers across the board are really very, very good, and this is one of them. And overall, they probably have the best selection of archers, although that is slightly debatable when you put them next to Arnor, but the archers are really the selling point of their faction, but they don't really have much else, honestly. Like, they have a good amount of spears, but none of the spears made it onto the top 10. So, I don't know, maybe, in the future, doubtless they will be changed, and I imagine that the Silvan Elves and Rohan will probably go through the most changes next. But the Sindar Archers themselves, they may have 15 missile damage, which does outperform a couple of other units on this list, but what lets them down slightly is they only have good armor, whereas most of the units that are ahead of them have got excellent armor. And every unit that's above them on this list has the good versus armor trait as well. There's only the Athelian Rangers and Bardian Marksmen that didn't. So yeah, the Sindar archers, still a very good arch unit, still very, very damaging, a lot of ammo of course, but ultimately they are outperformed by those that are above them, even if they have a slightly higher missile damage than two other units that worm their way ahead of them. And we'll take a look at that now by moving on to number 5. So at number 5 we have the very neat looking Naru and Aru Royal Archers of Harad. They have 19 attack, 23 defense I should say, 8 charge, and they usually have 122 men in the unit, 14 missile damage and 2 hit points. They have a lot of other things that come with them as well. They inspire nearby units, they can deploy stakes, they're good versus armor and in deserts, they have good armor and excellent stamina. Now I penalise the Sindar archers for only having good armor and not excellent armor, and that's the case with these guys as well. But ultimately, the sheer number of these guys when compared to the Sindar archers makes them better, and that's really the only difference between them. The inspiration of nearby troops is always nice as well. But other than that, they perform very similar in pretty much all aspects. Of course, there is a slight discrepancy when it comes to their defense. 23 defense is pretty low, honestly. It's the joint lowest alongside the Athelian Rangers. But archers, when it comes to that, I tend to think of their damage dealing as the most important thing. And these guys will still stand up to a decent amount of punishment, in spite of their slightly lower survivability. Ultimately, when I was doing the testing, these guys did come out as better than all those that were below them, and they are Harad's best missile unit. And Harad have got a pretty decent array of archers now. The Hasharii Shadows and these guys are of course the best too. They have some others that are pretty good as well, and honestly, Harad seem to be a pretty well-rounded faction at the moment. Although I think that the eventual intention is to make Umbar their own thing, and Umbar will take with them most of Harad's good new units. So that's something to bear in mind, but nonetheless, these guys are very, very good. Decent in melee, very deadly at range. And now we shall move on to number 4. So, at number 4 we have the Royal Guard of Dale. They look like Earls with bows, and I always like the way the Earls look, so that's very nice indeed. They're intended to be a general bodyguard unit, of course. And their stats are 24 attack, 28 defense, and 10 charge. They usually have 72 men in the unit, which is the lowest of any unit on this list. They have 14 missile damage and 2 HP, and they are good versus armor and have excellent armor and stamina. It's really a very simple unit, and really it's their stats and their durability which lift them over the Naru and Aru despite their lower numbers. And, it was a very close run thing, honestly, between these guys, the Naru and Aru, and the Sindar archers, but ultimately these guys were the best of the 3 I found, at least on average. And yeah, other than that, there's not really much to say about the Royal Guard. They weren't good enough to get to the slightly higher positions, but they deal a fair amount of damage. Pretty deadly in melee, very durable of course, and Dale always were a faction that had very decent archers, and that is still the case. They may have lost out on their position just behind the Silvan Elves to Arnor, but they can still really harry you at range, and these guys are the best at doing such. They can deal out an impressive amount of damage over a fairly short amount of time, considering how few men they have in their unit, at least comparatively. And other than that, there's not much to say. Obviously, they have the same name as a Rohan unit, so that's interesting, maybe. But yeah, we'll move on to the top 3 now, because there isn't really much to say about the Royal Guard in terms of what they are. Arnor have become somewhat infamous for their ranged units in Reforged and how strong they are, and the Dunedain bodyguard is one of them, with 28 attack, 32 defense, and 10 charge, with 80 men in the unit under normal circumstances, although 81 maybe usually because the general will often be here. Means they are a potent melee force as well as at range. 14 missile damage and 2 hit points means they're on par at least with most of the units before them. They can deploy stakes, they can hide anywhere, they're good versus armor and in woods, and they have excellent armor and stamina. So all of these things combined means they are essentially just a better version of the Hasharii Shadows in every way, other than they do have a few less men, but it doesn't matter overly, because they just have the stats to surpass them. And yeah, the Dunedain bodyguard are a very good place to put your general, because even if an enemy infantry unit manages to engage them, it doesn't really matter too much because they are very, very good in melee. Despite the fact they look like they have light armor, they aren't like the Dunedain Rangers, where their armor is light enough for you to be able to overpower them. They are deceptively good in melee. And of course at range, they're very, very deadly. 14 missile damage and 2 HP means they are on par with what came before them. And being good versus armor, being able to hide anywhere. Stakes is also nice. You know, most of the units on this list can't actually deploy stakes, only a few, but this is one of them, and it's useful to have. It means cavalry can't just charge you from the front. But yeah, the Dunedain Bodyguard, one of Arnor's more infamous units. We'll get on to the other one, which has become somewhat well known over the course of the last few updates, but for now we'll move on to number 2. So here we are at number 2, and I'm sure that most of you will be wondering why on earth the Dunedain Steelbowmen aren't at number 1, and before you bite my head off, let me explain how they've been changed in the latest patch, and then maybe you'll be more inclined to agree with me. They have 28 attack, 34 defense, and 8 charge, so that's very good melee stats. 90 men in the unit under normal circumstances, that has been reduced from 120. They have 18 missile damage and 2 hit points. Now, admittedly, at first glance, that's ridiculous. 18 missile damage is better than anything other than one ranged unit, and that being the Black Block Engineers, which are, of course, crossbows. And also they can deploy stakes, they're good at hiding in woods, they're good versus armor in the woods and in the snow, they have excellent armor and stamina. All of these things would lead you to believe these guys should be number 1 without a doubt. And I would agree with you if not for one thing, and that is the fact they have low ammunition. They can essentially take out one unit of elite infantry with the amount of ammunition they have. This makes them almost an assassin-like unit if you use them correctly, and then once you've taken out said unit, you have a unit of makeshift battle-ready Dunedain to use as you see fit. And that's the function of the Steelbowmen. They're used to kill elite infantry. You can't be wasting ammunition from these guys. This is true for every elite archer, but it's absolutely critical with the Steelbowmen now. Now, before the latest patch, they were objectively overpowered. They had more men in the unit. They did have less missile damage, but they had the same amount of ammunition as all of the best archers that were their peers. And yeah, they were overpowered. There was no getting around that fact. They made Arnor probably the strongest faction all on their lonesome, which, you know, they have been changed. And they still want these guys to be strong. And I get that. And I think they have struck up a decent balance with these guys. I think that, you know, the fact that you can have 2 of them, perhaps there is a case for saying they are still perhaps a little bit too strong, particularly because Arnor don't overly rely on their archers anyway. Their cavalry and their infantry is still pretty strong enough to go toe-to-toe with all the others. Whereas the likes of the Silvan Elves and Dale maybe struggle in a few areas that Arnor don't, and Arnor still potentially have got the best archers across the board. I would say that the Silvan Elves probably have got a better archer contingent than Arnor have overall. But yeah, but now we'll move on to number 1, where the Silvan Elves will finally get their moment. Here we are then, the Elder Royal Council, in my opinion the best archer unit that is in the game as of this moment. They have 32 attack, 34 defense and 11 charge. All of these stats make them the best individually in melee of all the archers on this list as well. They usually have 82 men in the unit, they have 15 missile damage and 2 hit points. They're good at hiding in the woods, they're good versus armor in the woods and in the snow, and they have excellent armor and stamina, of course. Pretty much, they are the much better version of the Sindar archers we met earlier. They're more durable, and they're better in melee, and all of that good stuff. They're also very expensive. I'm also going to use this moment to say that the Silvan Elves, my complaints about the Silvan Elves in vanilla have essentially been deepened in Reforged. They are completely dependent on their archers now. Their cavalry is not half bad, and their spears are not half bad, but their archers, you know, they're completely dependent on them to get any sort of victory. And, you know, whereas the High Elves managed to sort of melt my concerns away a little bit, because I was always of the opinion that the Elven factions in vanilla always had a problem with making up the numbers disadvantage they always had. The High Elves infantry has made that, well, and cavalry has made it so that I think they are now one of the best factions, certainly. And they have, you know, made my complaints from vanilla go away, whereas the Silvan Elves, the complaints I have from vanilla are still there. Although I don't think that's a problem with their archers, I just think their spears need a little bit of a buff, but that's just me. But yeah, the archers, the Elder Royal Council, are, in my opinion, the single best foot archer unit that are in the game as of right now. I'm sure some people will say that the Steelbowmen are still slightly better, as in a 1v1 the Steelbowmen will beat them, because of course it's a 1 unit versus 1 unit thing, but ultimately these guys have got a lot of ammunition, and they will get a lot more kills from range. And when you commit them to melee, they are better in melee. So, in my opinion, that is enough to make the Elder Royal Council the best. Okay, so that was the archers, and I'm a little concerned by the fact that I don't really have much else I can do at the moment, other than the faction things, of course, but you know, they take a little longer to do because of the format I chose for them. I could make them shorter and easier to do, which would mean they were much more frequent and I would be able to get through them more quickly, but you know, ultimately I'm running out of things to do with regards to Reforged, other than just posting battles and battle replays, and I'm not really sure that just doing that would be the thing to do, because there are much more well-known people than I who do a much better job at that. So I'm not really sure where to go from here. If anyone's got any suggestions for what I can do, whether that be Reforged or whether that be something else, like I have mentioned Total War Warhammer being an option before, then do let me know. But ultimately, you know, not sure where to go from here. I could do the cheap units again, but if I was going to do cheap units, I would need a limit of what sort of florin limit, you know, cheap quantifies a cheap unit. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this one, and if you have any suggestions for what I can do next, because I am running low on things, then do leave them in the comments, and thank you very much for watching.